Africa must find an African solution to our problems, and that can only be found in African unity. Divided, we are weak. United, Africa could become one, of course, of the greatest forces for good in the world. That was a statement made by Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. The creation of a single African currency has for ages been a pillar of African unity, a symbol of strength amongst the African people. African dreams of economic independence and growth on the continent, and that was said by Paul Kagame of Rwanda. As I will put it, the African continent we want is clearly visible on the horizon, and today more than ever before. So, to ease the road, we will travel together to get there. Can a single currency foster African unity? This is Talking Point, and I am NJIX NABESEH. Stay with us. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you immensely for joining us once again over your Pan-African channel, For You Media Africa. If you're watching us over For You Television Africa or listening to us over For You Radio FM 96.3, this is Talking Point, your Pan-African program that touches all the looks and crannies of the African continent. And today we are asking ourselves the question if a common currency policy is actually a possible driver of African unity. And of course, this question we are asking comes at a time when several countries on the African continent are facing a lot of challenges with regards to African unity and solidarity. And of course, to evoke today's topic of discussion, I have as guest Dr. EDI ERIC, who is a programs officer at the Solidarity Center African Department. He's joining us all the way from the US. Thank you immensely for joining us, sir.
Thank you so much for having me again. Happy New Year to all of our listeners, and it's always a pleasure to be on this platform to share our modest views.
Thank you immensely, sir. Without further ado, we shall get down to discussion this afternoon. And of course, the first question is I would like you to enlighten our listeners or tell our viewers, of course, about what a common currency policy is all about, and entirely what's your opinion on a single currency for the African continent does mean.
Thank you. In an effort to, again, federate all these African countries, which all of them, for the most part, have boundaries, frontiers, states, territories that were carved out of the period of colonization. One of the ideas going toward this African unity has been to facilitate, the flux of commercial or trade exchanges, because this is what makes, and this is how culture, this is how civilization, this is how language, this is how invention, goods, and even the movement of people develop. So the idea of the creation of a common currency when it comes to Africa, or even when it comes to some regional groupings like the ECOWAS, is nothing new. We know that the ECOWAS, for instance, has tried to establish the ECO. And the purpose of that was to, again, increase the flow of or trade and commerce, right, between these different countries. Experts, economic expert, financial expert, development experts, of course, have seen that, as a necessary tool. I say a necessary tool, not the necessary tool, but a necessary tool to foster this African unity and make sure that you have a more integrated economic space, may it be at the regional level or at the continental level. Today, when we look at the ECOWAS, of course, what this ambitious project, has slackened down. We know that recently there have been efforts, to revive that. As far as I remember, by 2005, it was one of the deadlines, were established for all of the West African state member of the Economic Community of West African State to establish that. And today we still do not have that. It means what it means. And then, as you said in your introduction, years ago, President Kwame Nkrumah, the leader, the Pan-African leader who presided over Ghana upon its independence in 1957, also preached that, with the Organization of African Unity, very definitely, if we review of all of the documents, also indicated that, but till today, the continent does not have a common currency to facilitate all of that. Does it mean that, it's the only way around? The answer to that question evidently will be no. Does it mean that, having a single currency for the entire continent is going to be a necessary driver of this African unity? The answer to that question is yes. However, we will all agree that, as Sheikh Anta Diop, for instance, indicated in his book Black Africa, indicating what he calls, the economic and cultural basis of the federated states of Africa. It will call for many other things aside from just having a single currency.
Exactly. So you cited points. We want to reiterate that great leaders on the African continent, we had Thomas Sankara, we had Kwame Nkrumah, we equally had Muammar Gaddafi, that actually saw the African continent as one nation, and of course they fought for the liberation and independence of this continent. And now, given that you cited that a single currency is actually going to foster economic growth on the African continent, now let's look at its benefits. How beneficial would a common currency or single currency be to the African continent in terms of finance and development?
If I want to build on the word of an expert in the name of Nicolas Agbohou, an Ivorian who is well known for its staunch advocacy for many African countries, liberation from the utilization of the French CFA. Nicolas Agbohou indicates that the creation of a currency and the mastering a country or a continent mastering its own currency, it's a great step toward the creation of jobs, towards industrialization, and towards, of course, controlling its own economy and its own investments, its own basket, and of course, all the monetary exchanges with the rest of the world. In terms of benefits, very definitely a common currency, we all know, will facilitate the trade, commerce, in between different cultures. And when I say cultures in here, I mean different, areas or aspects of Africa. Let us not forget that, if we go back to our ancient times, there was a market economy that existed between the different cultures, areas of Africa, the different societies, by way of not necessarily using the currency that what we have as of today, but by a mechanism of exchange of goods that existed, or even the utilization of shells, the utilization of yam, for instance, which was also a currency. So this idea does exist, and the whole thing is about, again, to what extent it facilitates those exchanges. Another benefit in here, very definitely, when we talk about currency, we talk about the economy, we talk about trade, we talk about commerce. We all know that the more people move toward trade, we have an interpenetration of people. Interpenetration of people means interpenetration of culture, and all those things are key and important for this cultural unity, and important for this united Africa, continental, Africa, that's what we all want to see. Without cultures interpenetrating, each other, therefore understanding each other. Without human beings from the northern part of Africa, as you mentioned, Libya with Muammar Gaddafi, if those individuals, especially Muammar Gaddafi, if Kwame Nkrumah, if Julius Nyerere, and all of these Pan-African leaders did not see any other African, were living outside of either Ghana, Tanzania, Libya, or Ivory Coast, or Senegal, as their brothers or their sisters, then this whole idea of Ubuntu, will be void. So the first thing is that, to what extent, whoever is far away is actually closer, because we are all the same regardless of the distance. Trade, this common currency, allows this kind of exchanges to happen, and this is very fundamental. Of course, today, and that will be my last point of this question, as we look at the shades of African economies, we look at what the different countries are producing today. Remember again that I mentioned the ECOWAS and any other regional groupings. In the beginning, those regional bodies that were created first of all as economic organizations. Later on, of course, they were morphed into political organizations as well. To resolve, certain problems that what we have at regional level, continental level, maybe international level as well. But when you look at the ECOWAS, for instance, the original mission when this organization was founded in 1975 was to reduce the flow of trade between the African countries and the former colonial powers, and therefore Europe, if you want, and increase trade and commerce among themselves. In order to achieve that, a common currency will be a driving force, will be a necessary road, I will say, moving there. But Sharon, and to all of our listeners, as we talk about, with common currency, we also need to emphasize one thing. Is it going to be, or are we talking about the common currency like the French CFA, which is a common currency for some countries? Okay, in the West Africa, you have about 14 of them. I mean, you have about 14, 16 countries using the French CFA that can look like a common currency, but we know the problems that are related to that. So the point I'm trying to make in here is a common currency, yes, but a common currency that is controlled by the Africans.
Indeed, a common currency that could be controlled by the African people. Now, I admit all these beneficiaries, all these benefits of the single currency on the African continent. Are there any shortcomings? Say the African continent gets a new currency, we have differences, we have people who come from different countries with their respective differences, their respective challenges. We have cultures that vary from country to country. Now, are there shortcomings with regards to this single currency leading to African unity?
There are very definitely a lot of no, there is no shortcomings regarding that. There are roadblocks, I will say. There are other challenges that are preventing this, but there is no shortcomings, because again, to use the very bad example of the what you call it, of the French CFA, for instance. I mean, the countries that are using that, speak different languages. And when I say speak different languages, beyond, let's say French, for instance, there exist, different, ethnic groups within those countries or across those countries that are using that. Take the case of Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso. For instance, right? You take the case of Cote d'Ivoire and Togo. You take the case of Cote d'Ivoire and Benin. You take the case of Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal, or the Wolof people are using the French CFA, the Serer people are using it, within that same country. So I do not see some shortcomings in there. What I rather would love for us to insist on is what are the other roadblocks, what difficulties and problems that prevents, for instance, this cultural unity, and which, of course, will make that even a common currency will be not the solution, because other problems or other challenges, will still remain in there. And this is what, what Sheikh Anta Diop is saying, for instance, Sharon. In order for us to march towards a cultural unity, a united Africa, Sheikh Anta Diop, from the get-go talked about the linguistic unity of the continent. For him, this is key, this is important, right? You look at the difficulties that today exist between different countries, even bordering countries, countries that will share a common border and use the same currency. What is the level, for instance, the flow of trade and exchanges between Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso? These two countries share a common border, and these two countries, have quite a number of commercial, flux in there. They also share an interpenetration of people, workers, on a daily basis. So why is this that, the utilization of the French CFA does not bring necessarily the unity between these two countries? I think that, again, as I said, the example of the French CFA will be a bad one for those of us, who are advocating for many African countries to leave this currency and sever, what they tie with France in there. But at the same time, it does provide us, with some examples to again attest to the fact that, a common currency is not the only solution. It's really the driver, but it's not the only solution.
Okay, so you said it's not the only solution. So what are some of the solutions that can lead to African unity?
Yeah, let's look at the problems today. I think by looking at solution, maybe if we analyze some of the challenges that what the continent is facing today, challenges in terms of roadblocks toward this unity, those are challenges, or those are roadblocks, what can also provide us, a clear idea of what the opportunities can be. Let's start with the borders that we have. As I told you, is it easy, Sharon, for a trader, for a small business owner, for people working in the informal sector, for farmers, workers, agricultural, workers, for instance, to deal, right, with from Cote d'Ivoire to Burkina Faso, to deal with their colleagues, in terms of selling their goods and buying their products. Remember, again, I'm taking these two examples because not just because they are the best one, but simply because Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso have a common, share a border, and then they also use a different CFA. The point I'm making here is the tax system, the borders that exist, even though we talk about we're eliminating those borders, eliminating those tariffs and all that, Burkina Faso remains its Burkina Faso with its administration, and Cote d'Ivoire remains Cote d'Ivoire as well. That's one of the obstacles in here, how difficult it is to move from one country to the other. From us, for somebody from Cote d'Ivoire, regardless of the existence of the ECOWAS, passports or any other document that you have, you need a visa, you need some authorization to cross the border between Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso, between Cote d'Ivoire and Mali, or between Nigeria and Cameroon, etc., etc. Those regulations are in place, and they also constitute some roadblocks in there. Today, the African continent is talking about something that is great. I mean, the African Union. It is the idea of establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. This common market is going to be the largest one in the world, and it comes with, of course, some potentials. Not long ago, the Secretary General of the AF, CTFA, was here in the United States and signed quite a number of protocols with the U.S. government to help move this project of the African free continental free trade agreement, forward. This is one of the things that can also lead or foster or speed up, what this unity of the continent that we want to see, in the sense that it will again, not only regulate but make it easier for African countries to deal with or trade with one another, and who knows how again, some regulations, some laws, some policies will be implemented in such a way that some duties and some tariffs will be either eliminated or lowered, not to the detriment of countries, because countries will gain their revenues from tariffs as well, but the long shots, it will allow countries to deal with one another. This is another thing I want to mention. The other roadblock, Sharon, in all of that, what we are talking about is the type of products. Sheikh Anta Diop already mentioned that energy, the control of energy, is a major step toward this cultural unity. When you look at the African continent and all that what we have today, some people will say that the continent is blessed and endowed with tremendous natural resources, when at the same time it has become a curse. I think I want to empower people, encourage people to reverse this narrative. The oil in Africa should not be seen as a curse. And for some of us, who are believers, regardless of whatever religion that we follow, it is, and there is a reason why those things are in there, is for the well-being of people. As long as we continue to see it, and I understand why people say that, but as long as we continue to see all these natural resources as a curse for the continent because of the greediness of other partners in taking it, and of course, we're leaving nothing for the Africans. We will continue to shoot ourselves, in our feet, and we don't want to do that. What we want to do is, how can we harness all these wealth, these natural resources, for the well-being? Energy, in terms of oil, in terms of gas, in terms of even water distribution, for instance, or access to potable water. These are the things that the African continent should be working on more and more, breaking down the barriers, and of course, we're marching toward a linguistic unity. You take the different countries that what we have. How many of those countries do have actually one language, native African language, that is kind of sort of recognized as the national language? How many of them do that? Not in Cote d'Ivoire, certainly not in Cameroon. And even in Cameroon, when you take the example today, when there are some political problems, people talk about Anglophone Cameroon versus Francophone Cameroon. Until today, that boggles my mind. You take me, a person from Cote d'Ivoire, with my ethnic group, belonging to the Akan group. When somebody from Ghana meets me, he will call me, oh, the French people or the Francophone people, whereas the languages, the African languages that we speak, beyond French or English, are closer to one another. These are some of the roadblocks that exist in there. I have not mentioned yet, the political instabilities that exist in Africa, that also constitute major roadblocks toward an economic development, and toward thinking closely and directly. And then the last thing I want to mention is the willingness. Nicolas Agbohu and as I mentioned, and Nabucco from Togo are the two leading experts that I follow very often on this question of a common currency, but a common currency that is controlled by the African, with a central bank or central banks, in Africa, and controlled by the Africans, mentioning that it is the willingness of the current leaders in Africa to say we are marching toward this, meaning firmly we decided that we are going to abandon this currency and we are going to adopt that one. We have seen the controversy that surrounded the so-called transformation of the French CFA into ECHO, a movement that was unfortunately led by Mr. Alassane Ouattara of Cote d'Ivoire, which kind of shortcuts the ECOWAS original idea of creating a purely ECOWAS own currency called the ECHO, which will not be a replication or a phase change of the existing French CFA. So Sharon, I have listed in kind of not in order quite a number of challenges, roadblocks that for me needs to be addressed, present opportunities to be addressed properly for the idea of a common currency to help Africa move toward this unity that we are all desiring.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Eddie. In order to proceed, you cited the issue of language. I remember some time ago the African Union had actually tried to implement Kiswahili as a language, a working language amongst African nations. But then to move away from that, let's say that some African countries, several African countries as we speak, are facing different challenges, and this is linked with lack of solidarity amongst themselves. How can the African continent push for solidarity amongst African leaders?
Well, how can the African leaders themselves understand that solidarity among themselves to the benefit of the people, right, is a major step toward solidifying not only their tenures in power, but also helping those African countries that themselves, move toward greater unity. Let's say this clearly: there is some sort of solidarity among these leaders. Okay, but the solidarity that they exposed today sometime is to the detriments, right, of the aspirations of the larger majority of people. Example. We talk again, and the listeners and viewers will excuse me for using the ECOWAS, quite often as an example in here, but I'm going to use that, again. We talk about, around the year 2001, 2010, I believe, when the African leaders in West Africa, of course, agreed that, the ECOWAS will be an ECOWAS of people, an ECOWAS a nation, an ECOWAS that will respond more to the need of the populations in West Africa, more so of the population of the leaders. When some West African leaders meet and decide to create a force to prevent or to fight against, a military coup. Not that I'm encouraging any military coup in here. That's not the point, right? It becomes problematic for me. Why? Because since the creation of the ECOMOG, for instance, which intervened brilliantly with some failures at the point, in the situation in Liberia and also in Sierra Leone, for instance, since then till today, we have not seen that kind of a force put together to address the question of insecurity, right, in West Africa or in the Sahel area, with all that we know as quote unquote, terrorism, for instance. We have not seen also a strong willingness of those African leaders, for instance, to achieve the goal of investing about 15% of 15% or 10%, of their annual budget into health infrastructure, which makes that, Sharon, when you have major crises, and that's another roadblock also, major crises like Ebola, major crises like, let's take the case of Ebola. I mean, we have a narrow escape with COVID-19. The health infrastructure in those countries are not able to contain those major health crises when they happen.
Thank you,
At the same time, let me finish on that. At the same time, you have those leaders who can actually indulge in medical tourism when they have the possibility of jumping into a plane and seek medical treatment in other countries abroad, which means that they are aware that the medical facilities or medical health infrastructure in their own countries are not up to par. Here are some of the things again that demonstrate the kind of solidarity. Therefore, in order for the people themselves to make sure that what this solidarity or these African leaders are working toward greater solidarity, number one is the time has come to maybe lead robust civic engagement initiatives among African populations for them to know that when it comes time to elect, appoint, designate, what leaders they should be choosing, voting for leaders democratically that have the interests of the people, the aspirations of the people at their heart. Hold them accountable. And I think the more we elect this kind of leaders, of course, the more it will translate into how the level of solidarity they have among themselves that will lead toward those African countries working more and more together. It is again the question of willingness. It is again the question of vision. Imagine that where you have many leaders as Gaddafi. You have imagined that you have leaders today in the light of even Sheikh Tidiane Gadio of Senegal, former foreign minister of Senegal, who anytime that he opens his mouth to talk about African problems, he looks at them from the lens of Pan-Africanism, for instance. How many of those leaders today do have that? Therefore, the job for the African electors, the African voters, men and women, is to again understand that a leader being elected is the leader that should be addressing their aspiration. And when I say aspirations in here, we are looking at what is this that people need. What is this that people have as rights? To what extent these leaders are addressing the core fundamental issues that are actually threatening or posing some challenges for the well-being of either workers, maybe workers in the formal sector or in the formal sector, of children, of women, etc. and etc.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Eddie. It's true that it's about the willingness on the part of the leaders. It's on the part of the African people to understand that solidarity is important, not just for them, but for the betterment of the continent. Now we have several regional blocks on the African continent. We have ECOWAS, as you have mentioned. We have CIMAC. We equally have the African Union, which it's a global body. We equally have the African Parliament. What role can all these bodies play to ensure that all the African people stand as one man for the betterment of the continent? We know it's about the willingness, but what can these bodies do to push these leaders in reasoning towards the right direction?
They when you ask what can these bodies do to push the leaders themselves are the one who represent us within
the leaders,
those bodies,
yes,
right? So you see that there is some sort of weakness, right? There is some sort of misguided efforts in there, and I'm not saying that all of the leaders will fall into in that basket of wrong or bad governance in there. That's not the point that I'm making. What I'm making here as a point is, let's put maybe for some time the onus, the responsibility on the shoulders of the millions of Africans. Today, we talk about the African population being very young. When the by Joe Biden administration here in the United States issued the U.S. strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, one of the points that justify the strategy is the labor power that what Africa has today being represented, of course, by these young people, these young people who have the potential to be educated, and among them you have truly people who are interested in the new technologies, and of course, revamping. Look at Sharon, for instance, the number of young people, young graduates from Nigeria, let's say even the Cameroon, but the leading countries here, for what I want to say, South Africa, Zambia, Nigeria, right? Let's take these three countries. The number of graduates who, because of being unemployed, are now working in what we call the platform economy, seizing or harnessing, what these opportunities with what the internet can offer today. You have so many people today who are actually self-employed by simply sitting in front of the YouTube or using TikTok to these are things, how inventive and resilient these young people are. So the Biden administration did mention that it is therefore critical to increase, again, as I said, the civic engagements, the ability to include and have these young people be interested in policy making, in political matters, not for the sake of obtaining a political elected official position to be, of course, looting public funds, but for them to be in a position where whatever step, whatever trade, whatever transaction that they make, they understand that the economic, political, social, and whatever implications. Once we have that, and I believe it will again translate into what kind of leaders would put in place in our local national parliaments, local senators, who will represent them, in what we call the African Parliament, for instance, or the ECOWAS Parliament, or the CIMAC Parliament, who will represent them in other international bodies. When I look at Secretary Wamkele, who is the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I see a young, willing, very focused, devoted, and ambitious young man who has vision for the continent. How many of these leaders can we have, for instance, working in those international institutions, may it be at the regional level or at the continental level, to drive Africa in the direction where we want to go? So I am not going, not out of cynicism, put the onus or the responsibility of those African leaders, but I say, let's turn the tide a little bit and say, how do we work? How do we work at the educational level, but also civic engagement, as I said, on a daily basis, not just waiting for the time of election, but at it on a daily basis, to make sure that, these young people in Africa today who represent the future of the continent, the hope of the continent, who are the reason or one of the reasons why many other international partners continue to be interested in Africa. A matter of fact, look at the number of these young people who actually are trying to leave the continent. Okay? Why is that they're leaving? And when they leave, what do they do? It is not, out of just a fortune like that, what people think, that, young African people, in the diaspora, maybe in Europe or in North America, are well educated. How do we harness therefore this energy? Civic engagement for these people to be able to hold their leaders accountable. And once we start doing that at the local level, I'm sure that it will also translate again at the regional and international level, and lead again those institutions that you mentioned, the African Union, the African Union Parliament, the CIMAC, ECOWAS, SEAC, and all of them in the right direction.
Thank you, Mantley, sir. In order to proceed, you've said young leaders have to engage in fostering the growth of the continent. Now, young leaders are very quick when it comes to judging the leaders that are put in power, but you see that just a few of them actually take matters into their hand and push for the growth of the continent. We have seen a lot that actually is thriving so far, but then those that are left back, how can the leaders encourage them to come to the forefront and of course push forward with what they have in mind for the continent's growth?
Well, there are let me put it this way, that there is hope, even though, as you said, the leaders, how can they push them when we make this statement about the educational system? I wanted to expand it beyond the classroom, and this is the reason why, again, I have insisted for a while during this show now on civic engagement. There is no, and I do not believe that there is a world that we call education here, and another world that we call trade and business in here, and another world that we call politics over here, and another word that we call maybe election over there. For me, all of those elements are interconnected. Why? Because it is a policy that determines how much taxes you're going to pay. That is policy that determine the type of educational system you're going to be trained into. It is a policy that determines who is going to be elected, who is able to vote, who is not able to vote, who is excluded, who is not excluded. Therefore, all of those elements are interconnected. It is a policy that give or make sure that we empower. Another big chunk of the African population that sometimes we forget is women and girls, with all that what they are facing in their countries in India. Okay, but yet we remember again to go back to our original topic. When we talk about the economy, we know that the African continent has the largest number of people working in what we know as the informal sector, and West Africa is leading. Right? We talk about over 70% of people being employed in what we know as the informal sector. At the same time, also, we talked about the number of people who actually do have, the number of families who have access to a bank account. When I talk about education, therefore, for all of these young people, or for all of these individuals, this is the breadth of issues, areas, or if you want, items that I want to include in there. We came out of a school system, Sharon, to take our own examples. We take out of the school system without necessarily understanding what a bank account means, or a bank system means. To what extent it is beneficial to have a bank account. We came out of that not knowing that a bank can actually loan you money to do X, Y, and Z, which is very rare. The number of people who have access to loans in our countries are completely low. To what extent maybe a common currency or an economy, a currency that is being controlled by our countries can actually allow even the least of the African, right, to have access to a banking institution, and of course to capital to either run a business or this and that. All of those things come up with a policy, and that's what I call again ways in which the African leaders can empower these youth in India. Of course, there is something that is important in here as well. An economy is run by and for people, individuals, workers, and these young people, as we say, represent a potential source of labor. How again work that is being created is decent, and this is the reason why my passion for the Solidarity Center comes in. How do we empower workers to claim, demand, have their workers' rights were being respected at all levels, may it be in what we know as the informal sector or what we know in the formal sector. How do we make sure that those young people, even when they work, have access to social protection? How many people can lean on their salaries to very clearly have access to a court system or have access to a health system, for instance. I was preparing a document yesterday and consulted with in Guinea, for instance, looking at the situation with the trial, were going on, and find out that, for most Guinean, out of a study that was conducted in 2018, over 57 people surveyed believe that, the justice system in their country is too expensive, for instance, right? There are too many things to be doing. If people have decent work, people have social protection, it covers all of those things. And I believe this is where the African leaders should be also looking into. That will reduce the number of young people who want to leave the continent, who have lost faith in the continent, lost faith in the leaders, and lost faith in their countries as well.
Thank you immensely, Dr. EDI ERIC, for that powerful contribution. Of course, we are gradually coming to the end of today's edition of Talking Points, but then having cited all these points, powerful points with regards to the African continent, now you brought in the issue of the young generation. What role can they play towards channeling the continent towards solidarity, given it's not just about leaders? This young population constitute a greater majority of the continent.
Well, I want to start by maybe bringing something that I remember of my childhood. My father worked for a company that is a defunct today, Air Afrique, which has the largest flying space in the world, because Air Afrique was a consortium of almost 10 African countries. It was founded, I think, in early 1960s with the Treaty of Yaoundé in Cameroon. Headquarters, in Abidjan and Senegal, Dakar. Why am I bringing this? I'm bringing this because Air Afrique, for its social responsibility, organized every year up to 1984, I believe. There hasn't been any other summer camp after that, but Air Afrique used to organize a summer camp for the children of its personnel, those who can attend. And the summer camp was held in different countries. The first one that I attended was in Côte d'Ivoire. It allowed me myself to discover as a child some areas of Côte d'Ivoire that I was not aware of, that I did not know before, and that I heard about, but I thought were very far away from Abidjan. The year after that, we all congregated in, I think, in Burkina Faso. At the time, the country was called Haute-Volta, and that was, a year before the Thomas Sankara revolution that changed the name into Burkina Faso. We also went to Togo for another summer camp, and the last one that I participated in was in Saint-Louis in Senegal. Why am I bringing this point? You have in there young people who, year after year, have built a network of friendship. When we return home, of course, throughout the year, even leaving Togo, for instance, after Togo went to Saint Louis, Senegal, we all gave each other this accolade that, hey, are we meeting again next year? Yes. And it became this kind of thing. Till today, Sharon, there are those friends that I have who are actually friends that I met during this summer camps. They are either friends from Côte d'Ivoire, because they're from Côte d'Ivoire, or from Togo, or from Senegal, or from even Congo. And we have maintained this network for a long period of time. Where do we did that drive? This concept created some sort of awareness that, whether we from Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, Benin, Guinea, Senegal, Mali, which was also part of that, we are all the same. We are all the same children of Air Afrique. We are all the same children of Africa. How does that translate into answering the question that but you are raising here, how young people can do that? Let's travel more. Again, I said it is easier for somebody to pick up to get on the flights and go to France than it is for him or for her to fly to Senegal, for instance.
Yes.
Sometimes we have people. Where are the cultural exchanges today? Where are the cultural exchanges between schools? Where is or how do the South-South cooperations reflect in some schools in Cote d'Ivoire building partnership with schools in Ghana, Mali for these habitual, cultural exchanges, for instance? How do we make sure through those educational systems, therefore, that instead of sending students to maybe North America, to France, to Europe, we can also have a pool of students that go to study in India, for instance, go to study, and we have that, go to study in other countries with a scholarship probably provided by the government of those countries. This is what other nations are doing. I came to the United States, on a USAID scholarship, for instance, because years ago, a president of the United States by the name of John Fitzgerald Kennedy understood that leading, advancing hegemony can also be based on what? Fostering cultural exchanges. And there is no continent in the world that can do that better than the African, because we are a people who love people, regardless of their race or their origin of their gender. So this is what I believe, Sharon, right? A path, a strategy, I believe that can be very systematic and that can be very fruitful. Let me give another example. Today, the return to what you call it, to the doors of no return. Today you have people who organize, in even some countries like Ghana, that have put in place a program to attract African Americans to come and see or reconnect with the original culture of their ancestors, for instance, right? To what extent those initiatives are actually also targeting the Africans, and these young people on the ground. And another thing is, again, the economically, as we talk about the startup, I was part of an initiative not long ago with the Afro Skills, for instance, okay? With some of your colleagues and sister Clarissa Vridoven, for instance, and I found the concept to be very interesting, very powerful, because it's brought together young investors, inventors, creators, right, and entrepreneurs to present their project, but at the same time also to learn from one another. On the day when I participated, we have some young people from Cote d'Ivoire, from Cameroon, from the Congo, from Senegal, that presented powerful projects. So the Afro Skills, for instance, is something that can be duplicated, supported first, and also duplicated. And that will, again, will bring these young people to cultivate this spirit of solidarity, again, through trade, through commerce, right? Making sure that the barriers to their trade, to their communication is lowered. My final point on that will be this: that about digital skills. According to the International Telecommunication Union, you have a significant growth of internet users, right, in Africa today. And most of those users, who are they? They're young people. They are using, cell phones for the most part. And the coverage is getting better and better and better. Of course, with quite a number of internet instabilities, some policies that are also put in place by different governments to prevent, a clear, full access to the internet, because there are some potential, the internet can be a powerful tool against a government. This I understand, but empowering these young people, and also increasing the digital skills among these young people is clearly another way for the African countries to build this solidarity among these young people. People communicate using WhatsApp, using this. They create, intercontinental groups, all over the place for economic reason, for economic purposes. Look at what is happening today between the young people, artists or YouTubers, from Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon. There is this kind of thing, but it needs to be directed in such a way, not with what we know today as the influencer or the influencing people in a negative way for prostitution, but again, for clear, good education and economic opportunities. And I believe that these are those opportunities exist and can be harnessed in the right direction.
Thank you immensely, Dr. EDI ERIC. But before I get leave of you, I'd like to ask you this very last question. As the program officer at the Solidarity Center Africa Department, what message, in just a few seconds, can you give out to African leaders?
There is a wave of change. Mm-hmm. They have to get on it, or they will be wiped out. They have to understand that there is a mounting movement of young people, young leaders, or let's say of leaders in general today, wanting to, as Federico Mayor, former General Secretary of UNESCO, said, to be in the driving seat of their own vehicle. The African leaders have to listen to this more often than they listen to any other voice. If not, I am very positive that they're going to be wiped out.
Thank you so much, Dr. EDI ERIC, for taking our time out of your busy schedule to join us on today's edition of Talking Points.
Thank you much. Until we talk again.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. I have been NJIX NABESEH for presentation. Stay tuned in company of our programs.